Here's what's coming up in episode 130. The hosts of the Living Dead Girls podcast.
Here's a tangible thing, murder. It really happened. Like, you can't really not believe it. Then you get the people that come forward later and say, I live on that street and we see his ghost.
Okay, there's going to be a movie. I'm so excited for this movie. And then I went to see it in the theater and I was like, wait, what? This is not what happened. So I delved really deep into it, and our next episode it's going to be all about it.
Even the most amateur of amateur crime sleuths can make a really huge difference. I really think that's going to be how Cathy Cesnik her murder is finally brought to justice. I think people are on the Zodiac Killer thing now. People just won't let it go. Like, we went to a hearse show together.
Yep.
One of the first things we ever did was go to that hearse show together.
I remember.
Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance.
The Living Dead Girls is a brand new podcast that covers true crime, unsolved mysteries, the paranormal, and generally spooky and bizarre topics. They're just two Murderino paranerds bringing creepy goodness to your ears. As of this recording, they have released 7 episodes. Their first episode was on Friday the 13th, which is so perfect. And for the first few episodes, Leslie, the Murderino, or her portion of the show, focused on the fact that their neighborhood of Buffalo, New York, is totally extra creeptastic and spooky for some reason, and filled with serial killers like the 22 caliber killer. She's also covered mass murderer Gail Trait, Guelia Tofana, the Ski Wing murders, the Carol Fitzmaurice murder, and the Bruce MacArthur case. In each episode, Kat, the paranerd, brings the paranormal content and has covered the haunted Hinsdale Dandy House, the historic Central Terminal, the Rampart Street Murder House in New Orleans, the H.H. Richardson Complex, or the Hotel Henry, the Iron Island, let's say that again. The Iron Island Museum, the Statler City Hotel, and the Haunted Spaghetti Factory in Vancouver. You can find the show at livingdeadgirlspodcast.libsyn.com and also thinktwiceradio.com. And I'll put both of those links in the show notes. Leslie and Kat were kind enough to have me on their show in episode 7, and I'll link you to that interview in the show notes as well. And I'm excited to now invite them into the parlor today. Hi, Leslie.
Hi.
Hi, Kate. Oh my gosh, I almost said Katie.
Kate.
Hi, Kat.
Hi. That's all right.
Oh.
Everybody calls me Kate at some point.
Oh gosh. What parlor drinks would you two like this evening? I mean, you have parlor drinks already, so you could just tell us what you're having.
I am drinking, like Captain Picard would, the Earl Grey hot. And I have made some chocolate chai for my co-host, Kat. And so we are drinking nice hot tea because it's fall, it's chilly, and it's Buffalo. So, yep.
That is perfect for the season. And that is a serious selection you have over there for your visitors.
In fact, when I finally move, I dread emptying my tea cabinet. I dread it. It's like 4 shelves high. So that was like an appetizer list of teas in the cabinet, but there's really more like probably 30 or 40 teas in there. So, yep.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
And what do you take in your teas, or do you just drink just the tea? Do you put anything special in them?
When I drink Earl Grey hot, I just drink it straight up. I don't really think it's good sweet. I think it takes away from its sharpness. But like with Cat, I put a little honey in it because the chocolate chai, a little honey brings it out. But if it's a regular tea, yeah, I drink it kind of British style with a little creamer and a little sugar.
Yes. I also drink my tea British style, except I use sugar-free almond milk.
Ooh.
And it really adds a nice flavor. If you put it into an Earl Grey, it makes it a nice creamy Earl Grey.
I'm going to try that.
I might have to try that too, because I have unsweetened almond milk in the fridge.
Yep. It helps because if you want your tea sweet, you just put a little bit of that almond milk, and that's all the sweetness that you need, and you're not adding sugar to it.
I love it.
So it's really, really good.
Were you the one that said the other day that you put condensed milk in something? Was that you?
Oh, it's
this is hilarious.
Malted. I put malted milk in my hot cocoa.
Malted milk is sweet. That is awesome. And some ice cream too.
Yeah. The way she said it though was great. She's like, I put malted milk in my hot cocoa. Like she was really happy about it. I was like, that sounds amazing.
Does it taste like you're drinking Whoppers?
A little bit, because I actually like to have a caramel hot cocoa. So when you add the malted milk to it, it just makes it more of a caramelized kind of flavor to it. So it really, really helps with that. But adding it to like just a normal hot chocolate does kind of make it taste like the malted milk ball.
Sounds so good.
Well, on the next episode of the Java podcast, we'll be
right.
So we're going to try to cover it all today, but first, who is Leslie Jean besides our Murderino, or as I've called you on your show, and I love this term now. It's like the coolest thing I've ever come up with, a murder paranerdo.
Murder paranerdo. Yes, I am definitely a mix of both. So for those of you who don't know what a Murderino is, it's actually a reference from The Simpsons. And it was coined by the two women that do the podcast, My Favorite Murder, Karen and Georgia. And it's just become like the universal way of saying, I really like to talk about murder and serial killers and messed up stuff. Like, so I like it. I think it makes it sound a little less intimidating, especially if you're dating and someone's like, what are you into? Well, I'm a Murderino. They're like, well, that sounds really nice and simple. You know, instead of being like, oh, serial killers are my thing.
I research serial killers every night. So when's the next date? Yeah.
I take notes and I fall into the rabbit hole down all of the true crime sites every single night. So who am I? I have a day job and I work in mental health. And that's probably why I started liking serial killer related stuff. I mean, not that we have serial killers in our office, but you know, it goes hand in hand with a lot of the psychology. Although I've now told Kat, after the last couple weeks, I might just one day post on Facebook, hey, I've left my job and I'm now working at Target.
I think we've all done that.
Seriously. What I mean, like, you know, I'm your garden variety creepy geek type. You know, I like all the geeky stuff. I grew up in the goth clubs, so I listened to all the old goth. I'm like an aging goth chick, you know, whatever. I'm a huge Harry Potter fanatic. I'm just your generally weird chick, you know, just living in Buffalo, New York, where it's pretty safe to be weird. It's safe to be weird around here because we're a blue state.
Well, I have to say, you talked about working in mental health, and I mean, that brings a lot of expertise and what's the word I'm looking for?
Wisdom.
Yeah, wisdom. Like you can bring a lot of, I mean, it's not like you're just blabbing about it. Like you have a lot of knowledge about the topics that would come up in a, you know, true crime.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing I've noticed. So I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, like I probably need an intervention. And I love the conversational ones that are like what Kat and I do. But I also really love the podcasts that are very like well produced and very serious about what they do. And they there's a couple of them that bring in, the psychological expert, and a couple of the shows, they literally say, this is not a psychiatrist and not a psychologist, but they spend a lot of time dealing with this research. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I am a licensed mental health practitioner. Usually where you find someone in the mental health, you'll find they own a DSM, which means they can probably regurgitate it right back to you. I like the shows where the people who cover the psychological side of a case will talk about the DSM. I don't want to pigeonhole, everybody has to have a definite diagnosis, because there are definitely perpetrators out there that it's almost impossible to pin one thing on them, and they wind up being comorbid, which is like a mix of things. But the DSM definitely comes in handy, and understanding how it's used comes in handy. So I love the shows where they're on it. Like there's one called Cold Case Files. They're fantastic. There's one it's just called Serial Killers. That's it. The two people that do that, they're dead on. They're amazing. And then there's more, but I tend to listen to those, but I do like the goofy ones. Like I like true crime all the time. Those two guys are great. I like My Favorite Murder. I listen to these two girls, and That's Why We Drink. So those two girls are kind of, literally it's just like, and that's why we drink. They're a lot like Kat and I. They do one true crime, one spooky paranormal story. Sometimes they do two. It's good, but it's nice to listen to those because it's like you're hanging out with two people just having a regular conversation. It's not taking life too seriously. Yeah.
Which you probably need a little bit of when you're talking about true crime and murderers.
Yep. And that's a sketchy area. The true crime podcast community has had a lot of, criticism as to like, what exactly are you all laughing about? Like, cause it like with My Favorite Murder, they do joke around, they crack jokes. True crime all the time does. There's another podcast that shall remain unnamed for reasons I will just leave, that they laugh it up too much. So there's been times on our own show I've said, just so you all know, I'm not laughing at these victims or their families. I'm laughing at like the sheer craziness of this, mostly out of nervousness. Like it's the nervous laughter thing. Like, are you kidding me? Like, so I just try to make it clear we try to be really mindful about our language. It's 2018, we have to be mindful. So, yeah.
And I think you've done that well. Like you have a good mix of taking it serious and educating people on it. But, you're going to have some of those awkward moments where it's like, seriously, that's the weapon he used, or, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I would rather people laugh at Kat and I making fun of ourselves and our weirdness than laugh at like, a mass murderer case, like the Gail Trait case. I had to type that and read it straight off the paper because I was too afraid that if I let myself wing it, the sheer nastiness of that case, the graphic details, I was going to get locked up and not be able to know what I was saying. Like, cause it's intense. So, you won't hear any laughing during that,
So do you ever feel like, a lot of paranormal people will steer away from, and Kat, you can speak to this too. A lot of people steer away from demonic type topics because just talking about it creeps them out and feels like they're bringing some kind of energy kind of into their space. And I that's not a general rule for me. I just don't always believe in a lot of that stuff. But I do think sometimes when I allow myself to sit in those topics, sometimes I'm like, am I opening myself up to that? Is there something similar to that with true crime? Like, do you have to like cleanse yourself after sitting and researching some of that energy of some of those crime scenes?
I watch a lot of like goofy stuff after I've been reading too much about murder. I usually will watch Harry Potter. I've got like a little list of like goofy things. Just, I definitely try not to do it too close to going to bed. I've actually lost sleep over reading some of those cases. I lost a lot of sleep over Bruce McArthur's case because it's going on right now.
Yeah.
Right now. And it's not that like time makes it any easier, but I have friends that live in Toronto. Like he was arrested a few miles away from my friend's house in January. So like I try not to do it too late at night. I just try to, watch goofy stuff. That helps me kind of, reconnect. I don't do the ghost stuff, but the ghost stuff, the murder stuff, the ghost stuff. Even like if I was reading up on like ghost stuff, I'd probably have to, not that I feel like it's going to come get me in the night or anything, but I think I probably have to do that a little earlier too. Like, I mean, even like The Haunting of Hill House, which I watch, I'm like, oh, I watched this way too late at night. No. Yeah.
Okay, let's see what's on Cartoon Network this evening.
Oh, look, there's an entire season of Mystery Science Theater on Netflix. We're going to watch that.
Yay!
Yeah.
Who is Cat 13 besides the Paranerd of the two?
Well, I have always been way too spooky for life.
That's a description. Way too spooky for life. Put that on a shirt.
Yeah, it definitely needs to be on a shirt. But unfortunately, I have been into this stuff since I was like a really little kid. So I kind of freaked out all the other little kids. So I'm like that kid that's always been weird. So it's not a surprise that I ended up here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been watching the paranormal TV shows since they started. My father actually kind of got me into all this stuff. He's into aliens and skinwalkers and all sorts of cryptids and other things like that. So like I grew up kind of doing this stuff because of my dad. And he, of course, listens to the podcast constantly and is always giving me notes on it. Same with my brother. So it's kind of a family thing almost, but I think I'm more into the ghost stuff than everybody else is, which, I mean, isn't really a surprise. When I was little, I guess there was something wrong with me when I was born. Yeah, and my mother saw her grandmother come to her when I was, taken away and say she's going to be okay. So
what?
Yeah. So apparently my life has kind of like revolved around some ghost type stuff. I've seen ghosts, maybe, I don't know. I'm super skeptic about all of it. I am very scientific. I really like to believe that there's a scientific explanation to everything, but I mean, you can't explain away energy.
Yep.
So I like to kind of have an open view on all of that stuff. But yeah, my day job is very boring. There's really nothing to talk about there. I used to work with animals, so I work with animals a lot. I deal with a lot of death having to do with animals, and I still see my deceased pets in my house walking around all the time. I see them and I go, I didn't know was that my cat? Was that my dog? And none of the other animals are there. So yeah, I actually see ghost animals, which is pretty interesting.
That is interesting. A lot of my listeners are probably jealous of that ability.
Oh, the more you know.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, Kat, from my conversation with you all on your show and from, I've listened to all 7 of your episodes and, we'll be excited for the future of the show. But I feel like we are truly similar in some of our beliefs about the paranormal and being a skeptic. And it sounds to me like you didn't have any huge paranormal experiences personally growing up that started this. You just had an open family open to talking about it. And that's kind of how it was for me. It was a little later for me, but it didn't really have to do with any personal experiences. It was, some books and, like you said, the TV shows and things like that. So I think we could sit around and talk about it probably forever and be buds in the ghosty world.
The paranerdy ghosty world.
Yeah. Well, what I would like to know is I've never really gotten into, Leslie, you have gotten me more into the true crime community than I've ever been in. Like I didn't know much about the true crime. I mean, I could see myself being interested in some of it, and I'm opening myself to, learning about some of it. But how did the whole true crime and paranormal kind of marry and be lumped together? That's interesting.
So for me, I've always felt that they were very hand in hand because there are so many cases that have little bits and pieces that overlap. Yep. So I talked about the .22 caliber killer, Joseph Christopher. What I didn't get into that I could easily bring on to another show are the people that claim that they have seen the ghosts of his victims, especially the one that was shot in the street. So you hear these stories. Here's a tangible thing, murder. It really happened. Like you can't really not believe it. You know, I mean, I guess you can, but person is victimized, A. Then you get B, the people that come forward later and say, you know, I live on that street and we see his ghost walking down the street every night. Things do overlap. Like we got to talking about, was it Statler City? So she started talking about Statler City, which is where we're actually going to be at on the 27th for the Witches Ball. That'll be interesting now that I know it's haunted.
I bet.
Oh boy. She got to talking about the actual murders and deaths that happened there as the result of, was it mob activity?
It was mob activity.
Mob activity. Yep. And I'll tell you an interesting story, but I will leave the names out because I don't want to hurt or offend anybody. But there was a murder in Buffalo. I want to say it was the early 80s. And it was a very famous local artist. And it's really hard to find information on any of it because the family was very humiliated by the whole situation. So a lot of it is not there. And this was pre-internet, so you could erase a lot of things. But there's a ghost tour, the haunted ghost tours that Mason Winfield does, where they walk right up and down that street. And there are numerous people that say they see his ghost. There's a rumor about the building where it happened and a lot of other things. So I think these things do complement each other. They do. And I really just love listening to Kat tell these stories. Like, it's just a way to get someone to sit and tell me stories, you know? True story.
Well, and it's an interesting thing to bring up because in both the true crime and the paranormal world, you know, we think of ghost stories as being like old stories. Like most of the ghost stories that have been around, you don't have to worry about offending anybody because nobody is still alive from their family, you know. But I've made a joke often about, you know, where's the ghost in parachute pants from the 80s? You know,
yeah, that's right. We talked about that.
Yeah. Where's the ghost from the person who died 2 years ago? And when those experiences do happen, it is kind of this awkward, well, should I cover this because their mother's still alive or their family's still here and there were, you know, their circle of friends are still here. And it seems like that would be true for sure in the true crime world for current events going on.
Oh, yes. So the Bruce MacArthur case it's happening in Canada. And the one thing that I was really mindful about is when I finally got a list of the victims' names that were, you know, only released recently, I wanted to make sure I pronounced all of them right and not try to cash in on a list of victims' names. These are real people that some, I'm not even sure that it's been confirmed. I know there's more victims that haven't been confirmed yet because there are body parts that have been found that haven't been fully identified yet. But my point is their families are still around and crying for justice in these cases. So I try to take it very seriously because this isn't the 1800s. This happened in 2017 and 2018, possibly in the 1970s as well. So try to be mindful of how I'm coming at it. Again, I would be devastated if I was listening to a podcast and I heard someone talking about one of my friends. Like I had a friend go missing a few years ago. We never found her. I'd be devastated if I heard somebody making jokes about it and laughing at it. Like we're still grieving. I don't know if that will ever end because we don't know what happened. So I try to keep that in mind. With the ghost stuff too, Kat is especially respectful because again, it's not here for us to use as goofy entertainment. These were all real human beings, ghosts or not. They were still real human beings at some point, you know, so try to keep it classy. We really do.
Yeah. And I think you do a good job of that.
Well, thank you.
So speaking of your creepy neighborhood, like for real, what's up with Buffalo? What's in the water? And why do you have so many creepy murderers walking around?
I don't know. Some people like to blame the Love Canal situation. I don't know if you know about that. Love Canal is like, I'll chuck a link up in the Parlor so people can read about that. I don't know. Like, I went on a bunch of those ghost tours, and I remember at some point somebody pulling the whole Ghostbusters thing, like, there are ley lines under this town. They're on ley lines. And I'm like, what?
I get confused about ley lines, and I'm still not sure what I think about ley lines. I'm like, what?
Then there was another tour that talked about the architectural layout of the city being like a Freemason thing, and I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk of Freemasons, a lot of buildings you can see symbolic stuff and whatnot. Also, most of this land was Native American.
Absolutely.
So, like my backyard, we found arrowheads. So there's a good chance that, it might have something to do with that. I don't know if we have a lot of limestone in the area. I know there's quite a few quarries, but I don't know if it's limestone particularly. But it just seems like there's a lot of stuff going on. And I know water, like flowing water, is also another thing that people talk
Absolutely.
about.
Yep. We are right next to Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
So,
So we do have a lot of different things that might add up to why it's just so crazy here.
Yeah. I mean, Buffalo is the biggest little town ever. So we've got your whole lot of average, everyday small town stuff. But then we also have like a lot of really big stuff that you don't hear a lot about. Like, we just had a Tesla festival here because Nikola Tesla had a lab set up here when he was first experimenting with power. He was using Niagara Falls. So we've got a statue to him and everything here. Like, but you don't, I mean, until that Tesla festival this last few years, you just never even hear his name. You just don't. But people are finally starting to get some recognition finally. Buffalo's just, I don't know. I'm just going to go ahead and blame all of the spookiness on the fact that our Buffalo Bills and our Sabres have never won their championships ever in the history of them being around. Oops.
Yeah, our teams are apparently cursed, like actually cursed. Someone says that they're literally cursed. So, I mean, there's that.
We just can't catch a break. I'm not into sports, but I'm just saying I have to hear about it all the time.
Yep.
So I don't know. Buffalo's interesting. We're a weird town.
It's been interesting learning about it. And I do have some friends from social media who are also from Buffalo and some fellow podcasters. And so it's nice to learn about Buffalo and some of the weirdness, but also there's some coolness going on in Buffalo too.
Yeah, there's more to us than chicken wings and beef on weck.
Yeah.
Really.
We've talked about the big LGBT community that is in Buffalo, and it seems like a worthwhile place to visit too.
It's worthwhile to visit because we're in the middle of so many other places. So you can come here, and then you're not far from Toronto. You're about 90 minutes to 2 hours, depending on the Canadian QEW traffic. Then you're only about, I want to say, 2 or 3 hours from Ohio.
Yep.
And maybe like 2 hours from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is, great place to go see concerts.
Yeah.
We're literally just like within reasonable driving distance of so many places. The state capital, I think it's only maybe like 4 hours away. Syracuse, University in Syracuse, over that's only about 3 or 4 hours away. Like, so a lot of people stay here because they can, those other bigger places are so accessible. I mean, basically we're all half Canadian because we go to Canada a lot.
I'm kind of jealous of that because I've never been to Canada. I'm so far away from it that it's not just, went to Canada today,
Oh, that's literally us. That's literally, I was in Niagara Falls, Ontario today, but like, that's the thing about Canada is that, we have a lot of Canadians that come here and we go there, and we thoroughly enjoyed doing that show. One of our shows was called Nothing Spooky Ever Happens in Canada. We literally had a dude come up to us and Music is Art. Actually, I think Kat had the pleasure of not having to deal with him. Drunk, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm from Canada." I'm like, cool. He's like, "We don't have any serial killers in Canada." I just was like, y'all know that Canadians are still human beings. You're not mythological creatures, right? Like, y'all still kill. Still got things going on. So, I mean, I can't prattle off a list of Canadian serial killers right off the top of my head, but I can name like two. And I looked at them and I was like, Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka are like infamously horrific human beings. Like, in fact, Paul Bernardo was up for parole last week and denied. Seriously, who you would even think of letting that man out? Like, there would have been a riot in Canada. So, but yeah, Canada's wonderful. Like, I love it. I mean, I've threatened to move there many times. So,
so have I.
Yeah. See, you can come here and then we'll all just vacate over to Canada.
There we go. So, Kat, what are some of your favorite ghost stories or even locations? It could be, some of them you've hit on in your show or just anything.
Well, I think my favorite haunted location locally is the Central Terminal. I've been obsessed with that place since I first went there in high school. I had an art show that was actually in there before they really started renovating it. So it was really, really decrepit looking. And I just thought it was so beautiful of a building. So I started doing research for it actually in high school because we had a class about local stuff. So we looked up haunted buildings and other things like that in Buffalo. So I kind of fell in love with that one then. But I think my favorite ghost story, just because there's so much to it, and we're actually going to talk about it on the next episode, is The Haunting in Connecticut.
Yep.
So
You're talking about like the first one, right? Because there's two.
Yes, not the one that's actually in Georgia and has nothing to do with Connecticut, but they put that in the name because they wanted to link the two movies together.
They're doing the same thing The Conjuring did. Like, we're going to go off on about Annabelle and now The Nun and all these other things. But yeah, she's like the original.
This is the story that was in the funeral home, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually, before the movie ever existed, I had seen every single show that talked about it. And I was like, okay, there's going to be a movie. I'm so excited for this movie. And then I went to see it in the theater and I was like, wait, what? This is not what happened. So I delved really deep into it. And our next episode is, it's going to be all about it. So hopefully everybody listens into that and likes what I've got to say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that episode is going to be part 2 of like a 2-part Halloween special we did. So we did part 1, Halloween Homecoming, which you were on.
Yay!
And then part 2, Halloween Homecoming. We're going to look like, we're not going to just talk about true crime and ghosts. We're going to talk about Halloween and some of the Halloween traditions and things a little bit. And I'm going to talk about a serial killer. Well, no, sorry, scratch that. Not a serial killer, just a murderer.
Oh, okay.
Who he's basically the reason why everybody is afraid that there's poison in razor blades in children's candy. He's the reason behind it. So yeah, I'm not going to give it all away because that would suck.
That's funny because I just randomly brought up that conversation with some colleagues a week or so ago. They were bringing up and I'm like, hang on, that's a myth, except for this one.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one.
There are people who have done things. It's just really hard to distinguish the urban legend stuff versus the legitimate, it's happened. He was the person, I shouldn't say he, it should be anybody. They did this, they were caught, they were convicted. Otherwise, it's like it's like, spread of word from one afraid parent to the next, So I've never had anything put in my candy, so I don't know. I guess people just like me.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of old Polish people around here, and they don't fuck around with food.
No, they do not.
No,
we do live in a very Polish area. The Central Terminal is like right on the edge of Polonia, which is like our Polish community town. Yeah.
I have to say, speaking of Central Terminal, I think I saw that first on Ghost Hunters, probably, and it is.
Cool they did it on building. Was it on New Year's Eve or something?
They had
that was one of their lives.
And then they did a live episode there, so they've done 2.
It is such an intimidating looking building.
Mm-hmm.
It's the center part is so tall, and I'm like, for a Central Terminal, what in the world would they have had up there in those, 80 floors or however many floors they're on top?
That's a good question, actually.
It was living space as well as offices. So they had a lot of people working up there. One of the guys who owned the building after it had shut down from being a train station, he actually lived up there. So for the longest time, after everybody was vacated from there, you could actually go up and you could actually see like paperwork that was left behind and all sorts of other crazy stuff like that. And when you watch that first Ghost Hunters episode, they actually say like there's papers everywhere, there's filing cabinets, all of that's been cleared out now, but you can't get up to the highest floors because there's no access. In order to get
the elevator
up there,
broken?
Yes, there's no elevator right now. So in order to get up there, you have to climb. And a friend of mine actually told me that he climbed up there and there's like satanic ritual stuff up there.
Yep.
All sorts of crazy stuff going on.
That I have heard. Yep.
But it's dangerous to even attempt that. So I would say don't.
Yeah.
We don't need anyone getting hurt in that building.
No.
We don't need another legend starting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like that place didn't really have protective ownership for a while, and so there was squatters there and a lot of things, and I definitely remember hearing that someone climbed up to like the 13th floor and had like their little satanic hoo-ha whatever was going on. But I mean, that building that runs along the side, you know what I'm talking about, like that long thing, what is that? Is that just like a car hub or a train hub?
The buildings behind the main area, those used to be like where luggage was, anything they needed for the train, things like that were kept into those other buildings. But it used to be a huge complex, and actually most of the buildings are gone now just because they got knocked down, animals and foliage took over. And I mean, even the buildings that are still there, you walk into that and it's clear that it's never going to be used as anything ever again.
Yeah.
But that's where people would wait to get on trains, or their baggage would be kept there. So it wasn't just the main building that was being used for that. There were other buildings, and there was actually a walkway. So when you go out behind the building, there's like this drop, and there actually used to be like a little bridge from that over to the other buildings in the back area.
Oh my God, I didn't even know that. That was definitely not there.
Yeah, they don't let you out into that area because it is dangerous to go back there. It's such a big drop, so you're not really allowed to be out there. But yeah, that's how it used to be set up. There's actually, you can look pictures up online to see what the setup used to look like.
Wow, it's an interesting building.
Sometimes I think about weird things like in the future. Like it's hard to imagine flying and airports going out of fashion because what else would replace it. But if you can imagine like 100 years in the future, are people going to be walking through abandoned airports and being like, oh, this is where everybody would congregate and meet, and this is where the passengers would because it's the same. There's so many buildings in huge airports too, and what are they going to be used for in the future after they're done?
That's funny. I never thought of that.
I mean, we'd have to be like holographing into places.
I was gonna say, are we getting our TARDISes sometime soon? Are we going to get like our flying cars from the Jetsons finally? Like, what's going on?
Right.
I want my flying car.
Me too. Or hoverboards. Although those are kind of a thing.
Yeah, they are kind of a thing. Yeah,
kind of. We made one in my high school.
Really? Yeah. You made a hoverboard in high school?
Yeah, I had a very interesting high school. Yeah.
Interesting.
It was pretty weird.
Leslie, are there any other murder cases you'd like to point out? Like some of your favorites other than what we've talked about?
Yeah. So like some of the ones I've talked about on the show are exceptionally fascinating if you spend a little bit of time reading true crime message boards, which if anybody decides to do that, I highly recommend you like limit yourself, like give yourself an hour, and when it's done, you turn the computer off and you go away, because you will be on there and be like, oh my God, I've been on this for 5 hours. It's like gaming. You just don't even know where the time goes. So
and then break out the sage.
Yeah, break out the sage. So I am really fascinated by the cold cases that are like 40 or something years old that have been long forgotten, that are suddenly out of nowhere being brought back into the light. And one of them is the Cathy Cesnik, the sister Cathy Cesnik murder, which they have a whole series on Netflix called The Keepers. And I am fascinated by that murder case. And it's been about 40 years. And I want to say it was last year, sometime in 2017, they actually exhumed the body of the priest who was the number one suspect in the case to try to make a DNA match. Like, how often do you hear about bodies being exhumed? You just don't. They exhumed him. They exhumed his body. Father Maskell was his name. And it wasn't a DNA match, but the biggest theory with that really is that he just had people doing his dirty work for him. Like, I mean, it has a lot to do with sex scandal in the Catholic churches. So, you know, immediately people freak out about that and the defensive walls go up and all the press statements come out and everybody. So it's, you know, it's 2018. So we're starting to get a little braver about that information. But the fact is that Sister Cathy was going to blow everybody in. She was going to blow Father Maskell in and the other priests that were involved in sexually assaulting the girls from that Catholic school. And I firmly believe, people will say I'm nuts for this, and I really don't care. I firmly believe they're going to figure out who did that within the next few years because of DNA. If they can catch the Golden State Killer, they're going to catch someone. And I also think that they are going to eventually catch, or at least figure out, who the Zodiac Killer was. I would love for it to be Ted Cruz, but
that would be a big story.
I have a shirt that says Ted Cruz is a serial killer. You want to Google that to see how that started, but honest to God, I really do think. And the day that hits the news, I'll be throwing a party at my house. People have Super Bowl parties. Leslie has a Zodiac Killer was caught party. Like, I mean, really though, I have to be honest, like, my interest in true crime really went through the ceiling when I first learned about Michelle McNamara, who was a writer and an amateur Murderino crime sleuth who was writing an entire book about the Golden State Killer. And it was her life mission to have him caught. And her passion, I was enamored with it. And he was caught, even though it wasn't necessarily her. It was her work with Detective Paul Holes of the FBI who brought that man, and this is a true story too. Paul was retiring. He was retiring, and they gave him one lead and said, you know what? We really think this is something you need to follow on this. So he went to that house. Turned out it was the Golden State Killer. So, it was the alleged Golden State Killer. They just needed to bring him into custody where he is, now. But Michelle McNamara rode around in cars with him and showed him, here's what could have happened and here's how he did this. And she got a gun the size of the, gun he was using and climbed up and down a hill near a beach to see just how hard it would be, how long it would take, how much work would go into it. She was going the distance in places that people in legal positions, law enforcement positions were not doing.
She got in his mind.
Oh yeah, she really did. Yeah. And her book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, is brilliant. And the saddest thing about this is Michelle died very suddenly before her book could be finished, and she did not live to see the Golden State Killer caught. So her husband at the time, Patton Oswalt, I think it's Oswald, he hired someone and said, we will finish this book. We will. And I think the Golden State Killer was caught like not really that far after when the book was published. So it's a testament to people's dedication. I think even the most amateur of amateur crime sleuths can make a really huge difference. I really think that's going to be how Cathy Cesnik her murder is finally brought to justice. I think people are on the Zodiac Killer thing now. People just won't let it go. And I'm cool with that. I just feel like it has been let go. Carol Fitzmaurice, local murderer, people just won't let it go. And her own family, a lot of them are gone. They didn't even live to see the justice for their own daughter. So, a lot of these people feel like it's their responsibility to bring some kind of closure to these cases. And I'm telling you, like, I really do think they're going to catch Cathy Cesnik's murder sooner or later.
I just have to point out that some of my favorite moments from your podcast so far are when you guys take tangents and are not necessarily planned. I think, when you're talking about Halloween, or you've talked about some movies, and when you guys had your conversation about The Conjuring and the Warrens and all of that stuff, that some of your random tangents are pretty good on your show.
We try to limit them, but like sometimes we just can't help it. Like, I'm serious, if Kat's talking about something and it brings like a souffle recipe to mind, I'm gonna probably say something, whatever. We also like to mix in bits and pieces of other things we like. Like, we had an intro that was ode to Twin Peaks, and we had another one that was ode to Harry Potter. So like, we do mix these things in because it's who we are.
Yeah. And outside of the studio, I follow you two on Facebook. You guys even are buds and hang out at lots of cool places, and you guys are such nerds together. And so tell us about some of the cool events that you've been involved in together.
We are nerds. We really are. I think the best thing we ever did was we went to the Twins of Evil tour together, which was Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson. And we literally used that show as a chance to promote the podcast.
Of course, yes.
I went in a t-shirt, and we went with purses full of flyers, and Kat did this intense zombie makeup, and we had so much fun at that. But it was really funny because, I don't want to bash on him, but like I've been listening to Marilyn Manson, her too, since we were way younger, and I've seen him at his height, and I've seen him now. And, I feel like he needs a day at the spa and a hug and maybe a nap. I don't know. So the whole time he's playing, like, we were mostly paying attention, but we were really like, hey, listen to our podcast. Hey, listen to our podcast. And then like Rob Zombie came on, and that was, we like didn't promote anymore, but yeah, it was a good show, but it was just poor Manson, bless his heart. Oh. We just do weird stuff because that's what we would do, podcast or not. This really is just who Kat and I are. Like, and the woman that did our theme song, Jess Collins, she's in a band called the Orations. So we went to her show, and I tried to make a Instagram live video, which I had never done before, of her, to just show our followers, like, this is the woman that wrote and created our theme song. So we do stuff to promote, but we also just do, like, that's just us. Like, we went to a hearse show together. Yeah. That was one of the first things we ever did, was go to that hearse show together.
I remember.
Oh my God, in 95-degree heat.
But that is melting. The best way to, a lot of people assume that social media is the way and the only way to get the word out now. And when you're going out and actually getting involved in hearse shows, that's the best place to get your crowd, man.
Oh my God, I literally left a flyer in one of the hearses. I was like, nobody will see me do this. Like,
I didn't even see it happen. Oh, so you must have been that good that I didn't even notice.
And like, it's pretty likely that most of the stuff we both like, we're going to be at anyways. And it all kind of crosses paths with the true crime, creepy, spooky areas. It all does.
How far do you guys go back? When did you guys meet?
We've only known each other for like a little over a year.
Wow.
Yeah. But our paths have been crossing for quite a while. We won't tell the whole story about how we actually became friends, because you just never know who's listening and what they're going to think of it. But let's just say we had an ex in common.
Oh, okay. One of those.
Yeah. One of those, but it was really one of those situations where it was for the better that the two of us spoke, and a friend made that happen. And then it was just a matter of time when we realized, can I just basically finish each other's sentences? Like, she's really like the spooky sister from another mother for me. Although I am much older, so she's like my little sister.
Well, why don't you guys give us your final thoughts that either of you might have, anything that you didn't get to share with us, and then remind us where we can find you and find the show. And if there's any social media that you want to promote, we can do that before we leave.
Okay. It's October, so obviously all the Halloween stuff is in full gear, but I like to remind people that a lot of these things like ghost walks and ghost history tours around here, they go on pretty much all year long, except for in the dead of winter, but they go on all summer. I mean, again, I'll plug Mason Winfield, and he's going to be stuck with us at the Witch's Ball, so I will tell him. He does ghost walks like it's his livelihood. He writes books. His books are fantastic. So you want to, if you're into all this stuff, maybe consider expanding your interest in the paranormal past Halloween. Like, you know, there, and the same thing goes for like the creepy, spooky murder stuff. Like, if it fascinates you, understand it's something that's going on every day. So I like to encourage people to go listen to some new podcasts, go read some new books, like look into your local haunted museums and such. Like, we have Iron Island here. That's not just open only during Halloween. Like, it's all year long. So I also really like when people share their scary and spooky stories. So if anybody listening to this is interested in maybe having us read one of their stories, and it can be in the spooky category of all things are good. Like if somebody's got like a haunting or like a UFO story or an unsolved mystery story or a, you know, true crime, cold case, conspiracy theory stuff, any of that, we'd like to read it on the air. But, you know, you have to email us. We take all the emails for those kinds of things at livingdeadgirlspodcast@gmail.com.
Cool.
Is anything you would like to add, Miss Cat?
I mean, yeah, definitely check out stuff all year round. I mean, there's tons of TV shows that you can watch all year about all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, if anyone's got stories even about things we've already talked about.
Oh, yes, we love that. We love that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been asking people for if they've got stories about places I covered that I couldn't find enough haunting material on, or something, you know, similar to that. I mean, even like if you know something about a murder case that we didn't talk about.
Especially because mostly our stuff has been local with a couple of exceptions. Mm-hmm. Like if I leave the area of Buffalo to discuss a story like the Bruce MacArthur story, I'm totally open to somebody emailing me and saying, oh my God, I live a block away, and here's what is happening here that you're not seeing or hearing on the news. I mean, true story, if you listened to the show, you heard me talk about my friend who admitted to going fishing with the .22 caliber killer.
Yeah.
I was like, Carl, you're going to have to call me. Like, is this some kind of joke? Totally not a joke. Went fishing with him and sat around and drank coffee and ate donuts with the dude. I was like, wow. So we like that. We like when people actually have, you know, a similar conversation going about things we've talked about. We're down with hearing details.
I don't know a podcaster who doesn't love listener feedback and hearing from their listeners. And we need to get you guys like a SpeakPipe account so people can like send you audio.
Is that what I called you on last?
It was either that or my hotline, because I have both. And the SpeakPipe usually sounds quite a bit better. And there's an app and people can just click in on the phone. We need to get you.
I love it. Yeah, that's like one of my favorite podcast nerd stories. It was this time last year. I was coming home from the Witch's Ball and everything was closed because in my area, everything closed at like 9:00. And we just wanted to get something to eat. And I decided, I saw you had a new show that it at some point snuck up on my podcast app. So I played it, and then I hear my own voice on your show. I almost drive off the road because I don't understand what's happening. I get in the restaurant and I've got my phone up to my ear like this. And the person I was with was like, what are you doing? I'm like, I just heard myself on this show and I don't know what's happening. Like, because I just called to say, I love the show and happy Halloween and keep doing what you're doing. And, you know, but I never expect you to play it on the air. I was like, whoa. just got
well, you're welcome for almost making you run off the road. I apologize.
I didn't know what was happening. I mean, I've left audio feedback for like a lot of the Harry Potter podcasts I listen to. And since then, I'm like, what if they play this on the air? Maybe I better not say that. Now I've learned my lesson.
Well, I just want to remind everybody that you could find their show. I'm going to give you a couple places. It's livingdeadgirlspodcast.com. creep.libsyn.com. And if you want to know how to spell Libsyn, because it is kind of a weird name, you can just click on the link in the show notes, or you can find their show with a bunch of other shows at thinktwiceradio.com. You ladies rock, and I want to thank you for being on the show. I could hang out and nerd out with you all forever.
Oh, you rock too, Patrick. You have something really special with your podcast. And I like I said, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and a lot of them I've let go over the years because for one reason or another, they just couldn't hold my attention, or something was just sketchy about the way it's laid out. But yours has consistently just been a very well done, very easy to listen to podcast. And I love what you do. So please don't stop anytime soon.
You're too kind. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you to the following super paranerds who support the show at patreon.com/big seance. Genesis, The Midnight Rose, Diana Lloyd, Natalie, Amy Park Gedicke, Sonia B., Jenny Becker, Kim Robb, Jim Budd, David Rubenstein, Josiel Lorenzo, Susan Davey, and Paula Mitchell. My supporters at the Parlor guest level, who can be found at bigseance.com/Parlor guests, are Dina DeCastro of Dina DeCastro Astrology, Margaret Hagan, Sharon Bowles, Marion Hover, Clairvoyant, Bruce Williams, Christopher Kohler, Lena and John of Carbon Lilies, Denise Sia, Anna Frias, Norman and Linda Keller, and Karen Prine. That sound you just heard was the Above and Beyond There's Not Even a Category for Your Level of Support fireworks display. I have an awesome anonymous listener who supports this show at the $10 level. And of course, Jeffrey Peck supports the show at the $20 level. Thank you, Jeffrey. Keep listening for that Paranerd Hashtag.
For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. You can find and subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and just about anywhere podcasts are found. Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line, 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to bigseance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.
The Paranerd hashtag for this episode is Creepy Buffalo, all one word. So tweet me at Big Seance, tag Leslie and Kat at the LVG podcast. That's the LV as in Victor, G podcast, and use the hashtag Creepy Buffalo. See ya.